Avengers Endgame is one of the most comic book movies of all time, and though it lifted plenty of its moments straight from the comics, it also diverged from them in quite a few places. Fates are resolved in a manner that differs drastically to how they were concluded in Marvel's books, while teases for future MCU films plot a future without precedent from the source material. It's truly an exciting time to be a Marvel fan, and while it's great to point out the many occasions where Endgame mirrored the comics, it's also interesting to consider the differences between them. The fourth Avengers film takes inspiration from a myriad of different books. The list of acknowledgements in the credits should imply as much, and so there are plenty of changes that were made to establish storylines in the film. Nowhere is this more prevalent than in Endgame's many endings. It doesn't suffer from Return of the King syndrome, but it does end up resolving the arcs of several characters and tease up the future of the franchise to boot. So, I'm Ewan, this is What Culture Comics, and here's how the Avengers Endgame ending changed the comics. Spoilers ahead, obviously. Number 8. How the Fallen return in the comics. Avengers Infinity War and Endgame take inspiration from a variety of different Avengers stories, but none more so than the original Infinity Gauntlet. The series sees Thanos collect all the Infinity Gems in a bid to win the affections of Lady Death, deciding that the ultimate romantic gesture would be to wipe out half the life in all the universe, which of course he does. The surviving heroes, led by Doctor Strange and Adam Warlock, hatch a plan to reclaim the gems and right Thanos' wrongs. They enlist the help of notorious space pirate Nebula, who swipes the gauntlet from underneath Thanos' nose. For a moment, it seems as though things would finally get back to normal, but then another twist ensues. Nebula, deciding that she would prefer to wield the power of the gauntlet herself, replaces Thanos as the universe's new omnipotent tyrant. The heroes then enlist Thanos in an attempt to wrest the gauntlet from her, which leads Adam Warlock to wield it himself. Warlock brings back all those lost in Thanos' moment of madness and restores the universe to how it was before Nebula's rule. Then the Infinity Watch gets started up. Great stuff. Number 7. How Tony Stark dies in the comics. The only time Tony has died was during The Crossing, a controversial comic book event from the 90s where the older Stark was replaced by less corrupt and way more annoying teenage self. Later retcon thanks to Avengers Forever, the arc revealed that Tony had actually been a brainwashed agent of Kang the Conqueror. When Tony sees his younger self, he's able to snap out of his control and sacrifice himself in battle, leading his teenage self to pick up the pieces in the present day. It should come as a relief to MCU fans that The Crossing didn't actually influence any elements of Endgame, but the aforementioned Forever actually did. Kurt Busiek and Roger Stern's comic boasted a brilliantly introspective look back at the history of Earth's mightiest heroes, and wiped away any elements of Tony's brainwashing in the process. Before Forever came around, the adult Tony was resurrected by Franklin Richards. Later storylines have seen the character leave the Iron Man mantle behind for prolonged periods, either due to ill health or to some other personal crisis, but nothing compares to the sacrifice the character makes in Endgame. And I'm tearing up already. Number 6. How Steve Rogers retires as Captain America. Before Endgame released, most fans were convinced that Steve Rogers would pass away. Not only was there precedent for Steve to die in the comics, everything in the film seemed to be building towards some sort of ultimate sacrifice. Of course, as it turns out, Steve instead decides to live the life Peggy wished he'd lived in Winter Soldier, bringing a beautiful payoff to his arc and taking everyone by surprise in the process. Steve Rogers may have become a permanent fixture in the Marvel Universe after being thawed from the Arctic ice in Avengers number 4, but he hasn't been Captain America for all that time. Ed Brubaker took the bold decision to kill Steve off after Civil War in 2007, at which point Bucky Barnes took over the mantle, and it wouldn't be for another couple of years until Steve would return. At that point, however, he didn't immediately reassume the mantle. Instead, he took on a new identity as S.H.I.E.L.D.'s super soldier, later adopting the stars and stripes again after Bucky's tried for the crimes he committed as Winter Soldier. So, where does Sam Wilson come into all this? Well, in the next volume of Captain America, the effects of the super soldier serum actually wear off. Steve is aged to a 90-year-old man and asks Sam to take over. He still maintains involvement in S.H.I.E.L.D. and is very much Captain America in the comics again now, but Endgame opts for a more permanent solution by committing to his retirement on screen. Number 5, the Asgardians of the Galaxy doesn't include Thor in the comics. Realizing that Chris Hemsworth's Odin's son still has plenty of fuel left in the tank, Endgame's ending repositions the Asgardian with the Guardians of the Galaxy. They're off to search for Gamora, it seems, and Thor is there to lead the way. Or is it Star-Lord? Nah, it's definitely Thor. Although Thor is now very much a member of the Guardians, fans shouldn't expect the third entry in the series to be retitled Asgardians of the Galaxy. He is, after all, the only Asgardian on the team, and he doesn't even feature in the team of the same name in the comics. The actual Asgardians of the Galaxy were first unveiled in 2018 and featured a lineup comprised solely of Asgardians. Angela, Thor's sister, leads the group, while the likes of Valkyrie, Thunderstrike, and the Executioner round out its lineup. More recently, the actual Guardians of the Galaxy comic featured Beta Ray Bill as a fully fledged member of the team. It's likely to be pure coincidence though, seeing as how Endgame had wrapped up production months before either comic hit the stands. Number 4, Bruce Banner is Professor Hulk. One of the best surprises with Endgame was Bruce Banner's transformation into the Professor, the name used to describe the Good Doctor's transformation into a version of the Hulk that retains his own personality. Many fans may suspect that the transformation may only be temporary, and while there's precedent in the comics to suggest that it will be, Banner ends the film with his new form fully intact. There's nothing to suggest he won't continue to be the Professor from now on, and while it's still unclear as to how great a part Mark Ruffalo's character will play going forward, one would imagine that this version of the character is here to stay. Whether or not that is the case, Endgame ends with Bruce still in control of his faculties as the Hulk. The comics, however, are a lot more wobbly. Bruce has been cured, transformed, and fiddled with on countless occasions over the years, and after Peter David introduced the smarter Hulk in his own run, it wasn't long until things were back to normal, and Banner's other half was back to his old monstrous self. Number 3, Hawkeye finally retires. Kate Bishop may not have appeared in Endgame, but with the character set to join Jeremy Renner's Clint Barton in a brand new series on Disney+, her lack of inclusion might be even more confusing. For a while, it was rumoured that 13 Reasons Why actor Catherine Langford was due to appear in the film as the younger Hawkeye, but that's neither here nor there. What matters is that, while the context for her introduction in the MCU differs drastically from the comics, there are certain similarities that may seed her first big screen appearance. Bishop first appeared in Marvel's books just over a decade ago during the events of Civil War. It was around this time that the original Hawkeye, Clint Barton, was operating under the identity of Ronin. The pair first meet while Barton is under that guise, and Bishop's entrance is partially what inspires him to take up the Hawkeye mantle all over again. The main difference between the film and the comics in this instance is that Kate starts out as a hero during Civil War, and only really cooperates with Clint after the events of Secret Invasion, which led to Marvel's heroic age. Whereas the Barton of the comics was determined to continue as Hawkeye, the one in the MCU is clearly set on retiring, providing a new justification for Bishop to adopt the Archer's mantle. Number 2, the New Avengers, without Thor and Iron Man. Although the original incarnation of Earth's mightiest heroes are no more by the time Endgame concludes, the Avengers are by no means finished. Marvel have been reluctant to confirm when or if there will be more Avengers films in the future, with the likes of the X-Men and the Fantastic Four to consider now too, but it's unlikely that Endgame represents the team's final chapter, at least on the big screen. In the comics, the Avengers have disassembled and reassembled more times than Spider-Man's changed web shooters. However, there always tends to be 3 recurring figures on the lineup in Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man. The former is off to join the Guardians at the end of Endgame, while Cap is retired and Tony Stark is, well, he's dead, isn't he? This necessitates a new lineup, and a fairly unfamiliar one at that. The closest comparison that comes to mind would be the group seen in Mark Waid's Avengers series, which also happened to feature Sam Wilson's Captain America front and center. But there are relatively few that don't feature either the Odinson or Iron Man either. Endgame concludes without a clear roster for this new group of Avengers, but expect Captain Marvel, Black Panther, and Doctor Strange to feature in the team going forward. And number 1, the Infinity Stones are gone for good. In the present-day post-Endgame timeline, the Infinity Stones are all but gone, destroyed in the wake of Thanos' decimation. Steve Rogers takes the older gems back to where they were plucked from history, and that's the end of the story. The Infinity Gems have been a constant force in the Marvel Universe for decades, but there have been periods where they've been destroyed. Jonathan Hickman's Avengers series, itself a major inspiration for the previous 2 Marvel films, destroyed 5 of the 6 gems when the Avengers attempt to stop the destruction of the multiverse. The Time Gem, the source of power for Doctor Strange's Eye of Agamotto in the MCU, survives the encounter and returns to Captain America later in the run. All 6 stones later returned during 2015's Secret Wars, and were then recolored to match their cinematic counterparts in Marvel Legacy, because synergy, obviously. Seeing as how the MCU has positioned the Sorcerer Supreme as the guardian of the Time Stone, with it now gone, might it be possible that Doctor Strange 2 will revolve around Strange's efforts to conjure a new gem? Alternate dimensions were already broached in the first film, so it's certainly possible, if not unlikely. The Infinity Saga is over, and with Phase 4 the start of something new, it might be the case that Endgame was the last we ever see of the Infinity Stones in live action. Even if they keep returning in the comics, there are still plenty of other cosmic elements for the MCU to broach. Best leave them behind, rather than succumb to repetition. And those are the differences between Endgame's ending and how things were resolved in the comics. Which version did you prefer? Be sure to let me know in the comments below, give us a like, a share, and maybe a subscribe, and head back on over to whatculture.com for more top-notch lists and articles like this every day. I am Ewan, I can't snap my fingers, but I'll see you next time. Bye!